Well, good evening, everybody. There's some really tough acts to follow on this one. But my name is Jennine Krauchi, and I am Métis. I am from Manitoba. My mom is Métis, and my dad was Dutch. And my grandfather, Alexander MacLeod, lived in the Minnewacan area, which is really close to Lundar on the shores of Lake Manitoba. And Monkman is also in our family, Spence, and of course, probably any other names that are in the audience too. But when I think of when I first started, as far as when I go back to my beadwork, I started really quite late in life. I started when I was I was in my 40s when I started doing beadwork. I had grown up with beadwork, but it wasn't really something that I left behind. But I wanted to try other things. I wanted to do other things. I wanted to do more sewing, and my mom and dad were doing a lot of the indigenous clothing, and that was their thing. I was young and I wanted to do other things, and then my dad passed away, and that sort of the whole thing was a full circle and getting back into my roots. Mind you, I never left my roots, but it got back into the art of beading. And I like to say the art of beading now, because back then it was just a craft, a handicraft. And throughout the years, I was doing, David, where are you there? I did clothing for Métis leaders, which were up there. Don't have to look at the faces or anything or the bodies. And that's what I was doing. And it wasn't really looked at as an art form back then. It was just looked at as, of course, again, men wearing beadwork. And so I did that, and I had been doing it for quite a few years. I would say for a good 20 years. And for leaders and for other, dignitaries and politicians. And that's the only way that I could probably have made a living or was, identified as a beater, was to be doing it that way. All of a sudden, it was Sherry. Well, I met Sherry Farrell-Rosette years ago, and Sherry was the one that came to me, and this really started an art practice for me, and to become an artist in beadwork. And she came to me and she said, they're doing this big project at the CMHR, Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And at first I kind of hesitated because I wasn't sure if I wanted to get involved in that sort of political sort of thing, I guess. And she said, they're going to have us in there, so let's get in there and do it. And let's be the ones to finally get something in a museum or in an art gallery. So that started, and I should actually have this little thing work here. I just click it. Green one? Right there, or this one? There. Okay. I started doing this piece for the for the human rights. And this was an undertaking that I'll go back to that one, I guess, after. And I started in with that huge piece of beadwork, and it was an octopus bag, a fire bag. It really represented the whole idea of our road allowance people, and some of them getting burned out of their communities. So that's what that exhibit was all about. Maria Campbell, is she in here somewhere? she was involved in that exhibit also. It was the first time that when somebody asked me to do a piece of beadwork, was the first time that I said, I have to really think about this. And I went home and I looked at our kitchen wall, and that was sort of like the top of that octopus bag. And I sort of like, that's a 4x8 sheet of gyprock, and that just the top of it, and that has to be beaded. And I really sat there. I thought, okay. And I went back and I said, yeah, we can, my mom and I can do it. I talked to her about it, and definitely we could do it. We finally, sort of skipping through quickly about it, but we finally, once we went through the politics and everything else that was going on at the CMHR at that time, we finally sat down, once we had the beads, the patterns and everything, we sat down. It was May, and our contract was for the end of August, that we had to have it done, and we did it, just the two of us. We had other people come in and join in and doing some of the trim of that piece, but yeah, it was. I think if I would have had more time, I probably would have used smaller beads. I would have really. Sherry kind of like, you can always, Sherry sort of has that silent sort of about her, when she looks at something sometimes, and it's like, she never really said anything, but you could just tell by the look in her eyes, like, maybe you should have done them in tans at least. Okay, we'll go, let's skip on to this piece here. This was a piece that I did, and I collaborated with a French embroiderer from Quimper. And it kind of went full circle as far as embroidery and beadwork. And this is more of a contemporary look of a coat that is, it's kind of like the Hudson's Bay blanket. But yeah, it was with the coat, the fur, and the beadwork. He designed the beadwork, he designed the coat, and he made a contemporary piece thinking of our as Métis. Now, a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to do a piece that was Métis. I haven't got a picture of it here, but it was at Radical Stitch. This was another piece to that exhibit. This was again, back to the octopus bag. This was the octopus bag at the CMHR with the 9 communities. I knew a fellow that lived in St. Madeleine, and he just passed away last year, George Fleury, and he lived in St. Madeleine. He remembers coming home and actually seeing just the bedsteads left in their community. It was burnt right down, and of course it was used as community pasture. So the top of that octopus bag is actually, it's the flowers, there's 9 flowers on there. That's the 9 communities there. The bottom of that piece, there's little fingers, like the little tabs, but in between, the little kids at Brooklyn School all strung those. And of course, I had some people come over and they did the trim of the bag. Lori Barkwell, Sherry, our son, actually the great-great-grandson of George Fleury. And I had I cut those pieces of red trim, and they had to go back in the same way that I laid them out there. And when I put that last piece in that his great-great-grandson had done, it landed by just coincidence right along St. Madeleine. So that was kind of a unique little piece there. Now, when we talk about reproductions, this is where I learned an awful lot about our culture and our beadwork and our embroidery, and realized how much work these women put into their pieces. I did these mitts a few years back, I would say probably around 10 or 12 years ago. This is done on caribou hide, and it's double cross stitch. And to me, this was almost as painful to do as quill work. Yeah. Oh, and so that's one pair of mitts. And this is Tikanagan that we did. a collaboration. And that was another piece, reproductions that I did for RCA Museum. So I didn't get a chance to even mention the porcupine quill. That's here. And I know everybody else that was involved with it is probably sitting in the audience.